Hi, and welcome to this instalment of our short video series, Social Value Always Matters. I'm Rebecca Harvey. I'm Social Value UK and Social Value International's Membership and Networks Manager. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Katherine Trebeck from the Wellbeing Alliance. So Katherine, welcome and thank you for joining us. Just to start with, for those who don't know, even though I think many will do, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do and what the Wellbeing Alliance does as well?
Okay, so I'm based in Glasgow, but the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is a global organisation, and we were set up a couple of years ago by various organisations who shared the sense that if we're going to have a chance of dealing with the challenges that were facing the world back then, let alone now, we need to turn our attention to how the economy is operating. If you look upstream at so many of the crises around the world, whether it's environmental breakdown or inequality or people feeling they have no control over their lives, and you keep asking, but why, you so often find yourself looking at how the economy is structured, who it is, who's winning, who's losing out of that, how we price things, how we value different things, what the purpose of the economy is about. And of course, for decades, organizations, scholars, activists have been saying we need to change how the economic system operates. But the challenge is all that work hasn't been connected. So it hasn't been packing the punch, if you like, in that system that we need it to pack. And so the Wellbeing Economy Alliance was created to try to help all that amazing work become more connected and hence more powerful and hence more impactful in transforming the economy. So it's various organizations are part of it. Really diverse, some really radical, some working deep within the heart of the mainstream, and there's young people, and there's academics, and there's authors, and there's storytellers, and there's businesses, but all of them in their diversity, united by this sense that now is the time to, one, collaborate like we've never collaborated before, but also to really focus on transforming the economic system.
And I mean, Social Value International, we joined the Wellbeing Economy Alliance at the end of last year, and it's only been a few months, and I've already got so much from it from being part of it. So it is definitely a great organisation, and that diversity piece that you've said about who's involved, I can definitely see that. So really the purpose of today's chat was for you to share with people the issues that you're facing them, how you're dealing with them, as we think it might help others, but also some thoughts around the wider context of how this is impacting on well-being, inequality and the environment. But first of all, it'd be interesting just to hear how the coronavirus has affected your work and that of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and how you have actually responded to the crisis.
So in a really practical sense, it's in a way, we always have been using Zoom, and a colleague said the other day, we use Zoom since before it was cool because we're an organisation, and so our natural way of working is online conversations. So that, to one degree, hasn't changed that much, but we had just got to the point where we did have a co-working space where a few of the team, those of us who are based in Glasgow, were coming together to spend some time in the same office together, and we were so cherishing that. We really have recognized that how being together is so important for a team. And so now we've gone back to how we used to work when we were at that startup organization stage. I think we're really finding we're missing being together. And so we're trying to find ways to create those spaces online where we can not just go through a to-do list or an operational agenda, but actually make time to check in how everyone's happening and be attentive to that. Because I think that human side of being a team is really vital. And I think a lot of organizations are really recognizing that. When you go to work on a Monday morning, if you're working in an office or a workplace, usually there's a bit of chat about how was your weekend? What did you get up to? And how are you feeling? And if we have just Zoom calls where we go straight into, right, what's the top priority this week? We miss that human side of the connective tissue that makes a team. So we're trying as best we can to preserve that as to the extent that is possible. And I guess we'd had a bit of practice at that beforehand because we were new to having a physical workplace together. We're also, though, in the terms of the content we work, we're trying to really support our members who, many of them in their different ways, are initiating different work as a response of corona. So, for example, one of our members in the US has been writing some really thoughtful pieces about if you're in a privileged position in the world, here's how you can change your spending or the work you do to support a positive response to corona. And so we're trying to amplify those sorts of ideas. A lot of our organizations are really focusing on that mutual aid, so we're trying to celebrate and support that and communicate that so it inspires others. And then for our own work in terms of pushing this agenda that we need to change how the economic system works, one thing that I think that's really clear about corona is folks who don't every day think about the economy are thinking about the economy now. People are realizing that our economic system that we went into corona with is one that stood on the shoulders of an army of pretty unpaid or lowly paid, precarious job conditions workers, people who were on 0-hour contracts, who were, I used to say, be treated as the same as just-in-time inventory, human beings that were at the click of an app, quite literally. And we're now realizing just how much the economy stood on their shoulders, and they're the ones who are still going outside, who don't have the privilege to work from their kitchen tables, because quite literally they're the ones who deliver to our kitchen tables. And so I think corona has really pulled back the covers of that economy, and we're talking about it in bigger conversations outside these sort of policy wonk conversations that we had going into it. And so I think that's really good, because it's revealed to people that glaring injustice of the economic system that we've had over the last few decades. And I think the other opportunity, in the sense that the conversation about what sort of economic system we need building after corona has been opened up wide, and that does create an opportunity, and I guess a sense of responsibility for those of us who have been saying we need a different economic system, because all the orthodoxies, all the political ideology has been kicked off the table. And so we're trying to figure out what's the best timing, what's the best framing, what are the key messages that we take to key audiences to really, so that we do, rather just return to business as usual, or even worse, I think, would be a more fierce, more toxic, more extractive business as usual, where it's very much about quick, get the economy going again. We need austerity to get GDP out. All the harm that we know that will do to the environment and to the most vulnerable people. I think all those hard-won environmental legislation, all the hard-won labour rights, for example, such that they were, I think, are at great risk if we return to business as usual, or a more fierce form of it. So we want to really talk about how do we build back better. And so that's what we're trying to figure out practically. What's that mean for us?
Yeah, and I think the point that you made there about the conversation of who are our essential workers and the roles that they do. I mean, that's a conversation that I've had professionally in the spheres that Social Value UK and yourself work in, but it's something that I've seen move much more into even conversations I'm having in a more personal aspect with friends and family and so on, that I maybe haven't had that conversation with before. So even on that personal note, I've seen that sort of change in perspective and understanding of who people are and who is vital and who do we actually absolutely rely on as the bedrock. And we've seen this absolute fantastic support for the NHS and so on, but also I don't think we forget that there are nurses who are having to survive off food banks, and so there's this whole very difficult situation of like you said, labour rights and all that as well. So yeah, not easy things to tackle at all.
And I guess the social value community would have long recognised that this extraordinary paradox, that it's those workers who do deliver so much social value who are often the least well paid. And then we've got economic actors who are extraordinarily highly paid and who have do very well out of the economic system. And then when you think about, well, what are they actually bringing in terms of social value to their communities and to society? It's pretty hard to answer that. And I think that'll be very familiar to the social value community. And I think now those questions are on everyday dinner table topics of conversation around the country. And why is it that our nurses or our delivery drivers or the people who sort mail or people who take away our garbage trucks, which makes such a difference to the quality of so many people's lives, are some of the least well paid? And it's this extraordinary paradox that just shows how distorted this economic system is, and that's a question of politics and design of the economy.
Yeah, definitely. And that that point about what do we value? And there's so much of what we have valued has been on economic value and how much GDP we have, but actually there's so much more value, and things that you said, like sorting the mail and people who are taking away the refuge and so on, they create so much value for us as a community that hasn't been valued. And so I think that's something that obviously the social value community and organizations like yourself have been discussing for so long. So it is an interesting time that we live in, that this is now sort of much more mainstream than I think it was, you know, even before the virus. The conversations were happening, but I don't think it had definitely not reached this scale. So that's definitely warming to see. But I think I don't think we can overlook as well that this does have an absolute social lens to it, and you know, there are very real impacts that are happening right now. I'm just wondering if you've seen or if your work has impacted or had any role with sort of the well-being and inequality in the environment as it's happening right now. Obviously we know so many people's well-being is negatively affected by this. People's inequality levels are going to be rising. It is those who are most unequal that are again being unequally impacted by this virus. I'm just wondering if sort of your thoughts.
Very practically for us, we've been in my husband and I, we live in a stairwell, about nine flats here, and a lot of people have gone home, I think, to maybe to where their parents are, maybe a bigger house, but this is our main place of residence, so we're staying here, and we've been collecting for a food bank. It's a food bank we've long known and supported, and we've been speaking to the manager there, and she's been saying they have been run off their feet with requests for support. Of course, they can no longer have their face-to-face distribution hours. They used to have 2 or 3 times a week, as I guess a bit of a shop front at a community centre where people would come and just pick up packages of food. They can't do that. They had a network of collection points in various citizens' advice or libraries or shopping centres, and keeping those going is very difficult. When people are now buying and they're restricted on what they can buy, they can't go shopping as often. People don't, donations to those food banks are going down, and so they're caught in the middle of this increased demand but fewer donations coming through. So we've been doing what we can to use our little bits of shopping and our quotas to buy as where we can for this particular food bank, and so that's been lovely for us because we've felt we're doing something constructive, alongside supporting an elderly neighbour who's on her own and can't go out. She's at risk. And then we thought, well, let's put this box that we have a little box in our kitchen we've been collecting every time we shop. We put an extra can of beans or rice or something in there. We've put it in our stairwell, and we've just left a little note out to our neighbours saying, hey guys, we're collecting. And within 24 hours it was overflowing, just from the 2 or 3 people who are still living in the stairwell during this time. And so I just love that, and we're going to keep retopping it up and delivering it every week. And so to me, that's a microcosm of some of the bigger trends. One is increased sort of hunger, as people's incomes have been decimated, but also the provisioning systems have been thrown up in the air with the different ways of operating. But also at the same time, just this huge level of generosity as we're seeing from our neighbours who, to people they will never meet, but know they're in need. And I think we've got these very difficult sort of nexus of those trends, increased demand, people, particularly the government is announcing a lot of policies and a lot of income streams, but they're taking a while to come online. And so there are gaps that people are falling through, and we're already falling through. And so we're seeing that manifest in rising levels of hunger, despite all the amazing responses. So I think there's a lot of different trends going on that make this a very confusing, puzzling time, but also a time where we are seeing some really lovely aspects of communities rallying around, like people who have worked at this food bank for so long and supported it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in Liverpool, which I think is one of the most social community cities I've ever been in. And I have never been to Glasgow, but I believe Glasgow is similar with that sort of community ethos.
Sister cities, aren't they, Glasgow?
Yes, they are. So, the community has always been such a huge part of our life here in Liverpool, and so it's warming to see that is there now and always, but it's also warming to see that that's not just something that happens in the microcosm of Toxteth and Liverpool, but actually it's happening across the whole country as well, and across the world. There have been so many heartwarming stories, and I think my sister actually, interestingly, sent me an article, and it was saying how the films got it wrong. You know, films like such as Contagion, where they talk about the absolute violence that happens when these viruses erupt, and actually what we've seen is something quite different, and it's societies coming together and supporting each other that we've seen, which is incredibly wonderful to see. And I do hope that that is something that we take forward as a society, this sense of community and protecting each other, which feeds really well into my next question about looking to the future. And I know you've touched on this before, and of course, you know, you've got the Build Back Better hashtag. But I'm just interested, you know, what do you think the new normal might be? I know you said, you know, there's the potential for it to be really good, or potential for austerity to be introduced maybe worse than it was. But is there anything that you think we will learn from and do differently, or is it at this moment too early to say?
I think to a degree it's too early to say, but I think what we can know is that there will be no return to normal. I think it's going to be a long time before you're going to see gatherings of 2,000 people or 50,000 people at a concert or a sporting match. I think they're a long time coming back. I heard on the news this morning that even though Italy is just starting to slowly lift the lid on the lockdown, they're talking about restaurants not opening till next year. It's going to be long. I don't think we will go back to the way of life we used to. And I think a lot of people will have to recalibrate their daily lives, even folks who are on sort of everyday, you know, average salaries, for example, that will probably go down just because of the reduced economic activity. And that has implications, of course, for just people's lifestyle, choices that they've made. How do they spend their weekend? What sort of holidays do they go on? How do they understand their treats or their nights out? All those sorts of things, I think, will have to be rethought quite fundamentally. And that's for folks who are in a fairly privileged position. I think that, to me, I've spent a big chunk of my life working for Oxfam, and so, you know, it's so very hard not to be terrified about what is going to happen to. I mean, we think it's tough in the UK. How do you self-isolate if you're living under a piece of corrugated iron in the slums of Delhi with, you know, multiple numbers of people in just a few square meters, where you're also living in subsistence wages if you're lucky. And so I think that those layers of hardship that were already incredibly difficult, just going to get more and more difficult. And it brings an onus back on rich world governments to do things like forgive debt, share technology as soon as there is some sort of hint of a vaccine that has to be made freely available across the world, and support for distribution, and also just support for governments. And the other thing is closing down tax havens. I mean, so much money gets extracted, not just from the UK's public purse, but let alone from countries in the global south, from their governments, that could be going into health systems and education systems. So there are big, meaty questions that we need to be talking about, at the same time as massively recalibrating our own lives. And there were no wonder people have heads are swimming at the moment, because there are so many issues that are facing society, but also at the same time facing people personally. So I read an article saying everyone's having a lot of more vivid dreams, and I can certainly relate to that. I'm waking up every morning like, gosh, what was that? And it's to do with just how much our brains are trying to compute at the moment. And so I think the other thing is to allow ourselves a space to personally let our brains take the time to get our head around the enormity of it. So I think the future is massively uncertain. I think there are some good hints in terms of this recognition, how much we need each other and what jobs really matter. I do think there's a huge risk, though, that governments, as soon as the emergency measures and emergency stage is over, they will default to old ways of thinking and old ways of understanding the purpose of the economy, and saying that the main goal then is to get the economy growing faster again, rather than thinking about what's the economy for, having a much harder look at questions around pre-distribution, around the foundational economy, which we're really seeing come into its own right now, around all our gift economy work that doesn't make a difference to GDP, and yet it's helping people get through. So I think we're seeing the pillars that will help communities survive now are things like the foundational economy, are things like local supply chain, are things like the gift economy. that's a sort of, they're the pillars also that we need. They're the big pieces of a jigsaw of the wellbeing economy that we need to go into. So there's opportunity and potential, but I think also really high risk. We need to really keep these conversations very live with ideas and evidence and suggestions and encouragement of those politicians and policymakers who are ready to embrace these conversations. And I think we are seeing some of that happening around the world too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think organizations like yourselves and Social Value International, and there's so many others as well that are part of our, both of our memberships and multiple other ones, that need to continue with this dialogue and continue that conversation so that we can do our best to ensure that, you know, all of those issues that you've mentioned and all the things that need to be considered are considered, so that we don't go back to what was normal, because normal didn't work for so many. So we do need to absolutely change the way things are. So just a final point. I mean, you've shared some really, really heartwarming messages and examples, but is there anything other than the fantastic example of the food banks and the support within your tower block that you've seen that's made you smile and you think can give us all some hope, just a cheery note to end on?
I mean, I think there's so many lovely examples, actually. I mean, all the rainbows and thanking the NHS, I think that's all brilliant, and obviously that has to be followed up with political action and agitation. We can't just continue to sort of do our clapping every Thursday night, important and lovely a gesture though that is. But I do think what's happening is people really having reaffirmed to them how the individualistic society, how sad that was, and now seeing people reach out and make those connections around the world. I'm speaking to my family much more than I used to, where I'm setting up virtual vinos with friends that I couldn't go to the pub with because I live in a different town, and now we can sort of slowly get have a glass of wine together and a laugh. And I think that, and also perhaps people missing human contact is a lovely thing too. I mean, you can go so far with Zoom calls and online calls and conferencing, but ultimately people do really value being together. And I think that reminder of that will be really, really something that will come to the fore, I think, once the lockdown is lifted and we're able to be together, whenever that is and whatever degree that is. I think people are just recognizing how important human contact is and how important community is. And I just hope we don't get too used to being stuck in our homes, and I hope we manage it, but I hope we don't get used to it, because we need it physiologically for our own health to be together. And I think the way people are, it always surprised me as an Australian when I go out on jogs or walking around the streets, how people didn't say hello. If you're out jogging in 6 a.m. in the morning, people don't say hello, and that always surprised me. But now people do, and I really hope, as they give each other the 2 meters distance or go up onto the road to pass each other, they're now smiling and saying hello to each other. I really hope those sorts of everyday little human interactions are preserved as we do try to emerge from Corona.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that the little things that maybe we took for granted, things like giving your mum a hug, I don't think they'll ever be taken for granted. I don't think I will. And things like when I am out outside, I don't think, I said this to my husband, I don't think I've ever seen spring look so beautiful as it does now that I can see it for an hour a day. I mean, spring's my favorite
as well. I bet. I mean, everyone's saying, these birds, aren't they great?
Yeah, it's just so beautiful. And I'm the tree outside my window, I'm watching the leaves come on every day, and it's just something I never took time to do. So hopefully all of these lovely things that we are seeing will continue to happen, and definitely. But that does wrap up our chat today. It was really, really lovely to speak with you and to hear everything and all the amazing work that the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is doing. Obviously, super excited for SVI to continue working with you and having this partnership. But I just want to say thank you today for joining us on this call. And
my pleasure, Rebecca, and thank you to you and your team and to all your membership for all the work you do, because I think it's really vital in pushing this conversation about what is it that really matters to our society, and hence what does our economy need to deliver. I think you play such an important role in that conversation. So thank you for all the work that you do in helping us move that forward.